Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Sports on the Positive Tip podcast, where we have conversations at the intersection of sports and faith. I'm joined by Kenny Squared. Kenny, I got to tell you, man, I know that this cruel summer is continuing. I know it's going to continue for me, but as a Met fan, but are you hopeful as a Yankee fan? Hopeful. There's still 53 games left.
I mean, it's still baseball, but I don't know. It's tough.
All right. I'm going to be anxious to get. I know the trade deadline is a little bit ago now. It was earlier in the week, but we're going to anxious to get your thoughts on that. Who do you think improved the most? We got to talk about that. Kenny, how would you like to be Trey Turner right now? Oh, my gosh.
I mean, I'd be crying, but crying with my pool of money. So I guess half and half.
That's interesting. I have some thoughts on one of the guys who is just an absolute hero icon here in New York, and that's Don Mattingly. It's not a bad thought because I think that he's a great baseball guy who I also think should be in the Hall of Fame, who is, I don't know if he's going to get in the Veterans Committee or not, but I want to talk about his managerial stuff.
Yeah, it seems very interesting. And I can add a little bit of a Yankee flair onto that, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean Payton, oh my gosh. And he regretted it after, but boy, oh boy, did he rip Nathaniel Hackett to shreds. We never see that in the NFL. We got to talk about that.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, I think, what he's doing, but I guess we could talk about it more.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he's taking up for his guy, but we never see like a coach kill another coach that was their predecessor like that. Anyway, you ready to do this?
Let's do it.
This episode is brought to you by Kitcaster. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. How do funded startup founders attract prospects and talent? Podcast interviews. How do entrepreneurs with exits find new deals? Podcast interviews. How do C-suite execs differentiate in crowded markets? Podcast interviews. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. Click the link in the show notes for a special offer. Celebrate good conversation.
Hey there, everybody. This is Kenny and
Kenny Squared.
with the Sports on the Positive Tip podcast. Kenny, the cruel summer continues. The cruel summer continues. The trading deadline goes. The Mets just sell everybody. I got to tell you, man, I didn't think that they was going to trade Verlander. I thought Scherzer sealed his fate when he publicly spoke out when they traded David Robertson. But I want to let's dive right into the trade deadline because it happened earlier in the week, obviously. And I think there were some teams that really improved themselves. I don't think anybody sold off players like the Mets did at that level, the way they sold off. And I'm just surprised that the Yankees didn't get a bat or two. And it looks like there was some out there for the taking because some other teams did get some bats. So why don't we start with the Mets? I'll be relatively brief, and I want you to go into some detail on the Mets and the Yankees. Our buddy Dave Ruff asked a great question. What did I feel about Steve Cohen's comments, the owner? I think a lot of people say, hey, it was him. He obviously is not making the deals. Epler did. He obviously signed off, though, on the amount of money that went with the trades of Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander. So there's a couple of quick ways I want to look at this. Yes, the Mets farm system is depleted to a really big extent, especially in the pitching department. But overall, it's four good prospects that, we have that, Francisco Alvarez is having a really good major league season in terms of home runs and RBIs, and his catching has been great. Brett Beatty has been a huge disappointment at the plate. I think he's batting 228 or something like that. 7 homers and only 24 RBIs. We definitely have to see more of him. And he's played a good third base, could be better. Mark Vientos has his ups and downs, but I think Vientos is starting to adjust to big league pitching. His at-bats are starting to look better. And Ronnie Mauricio, we haven't seen up here just yet, but he's been tearing it up at AAA. So we've got those four that hopefully will become the core along with, Jeff McNeil. Hopefully we keep Pete Alonso. The next year he'll be in his free agent year. Lindor and Brandon Nimmo, right? That's the core of this team now. And they kept that core together, but they reinvigorated the farm system. Every single player that they dealt off, from Tommy Pham, who was their most consistent offensive player this year and played really, really good defense as well. Mark Canha, who had a really good year last year, struggled a little bit, for most of this year. The last month was playing really well. Proven major league player. I remember, though, I don't know if I don't want to veer off, but I remember you said this and you were really right, because if you compare probably their stats now, no comparison. They essentially replaced Michael Conforto with Mark Canha. And I remember you said, yeah, I've seen a lot of Mark Canha. He's a good player, but Michael Conforto is better. And you were right. Although Canha is a very good all-around player, but Conforto is a better hitter, especially. And it all started with trading the closer, David Robertson, who was having an excellent year. He had one really bad outing where he gave a big 3-run homer, but outside of that, he was very consistent. 14 saves, but he didn't really have a lot of opportunities. And then there are the two stars, the two future Hall of Famers, Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander. Scherzer mixed legacy here, a year and a half with the Mets. I sent you his stats, which I thought were really good, solid 20-9 overall, 3.29, something like that, ERA. Better year last year, obviously. Had his ups and downs this year, but you made a great point that Met fans remember him for the failure in the wild card game against the Padres. Scherzer was an outspoken guy. He's always has been, but Scherzer can still pitch. And I would ask myself this: would you hand the ball to Scherzer in a Game 7 of the World Series or the Championship Series or Game 5? And my answer is immediately yes. I still would trust him. I mean, he's got great stuff, and if there was some times this year where he was just lights out. He did have 9 wins this year, so it's not like it was a total failure to me. And you had Justin Verlander, who for probably his last 5, maybe even 7 starts, like Justin Verlander of 10 years ago, or at least even of last year. Remember, he was out a month, so it took him a while to get going. But in these last starts, I mean, he's just been terrific, pretty much lights out. But the Mets pulled the plug on the season. Listen, after 4 months, the Mets have been very, very inconsistent, under 500, still 6-7 games out of the wild card, but it just didn't feel like they were going to make a run. So part of me understood trading off some people. I don't understand trading everybody, I would have traded, once they traded Scherzer, I think I was texting you that, hey, I'm thinking they're going to keep Verlander. He said he came out publicly, said he wants to stay here. He had a no trade clause. But then when the Astros got in the picture, that was when I changed. So on Monday afternoon, I texted you and said, uh-oh. But then again, the Astros didn't have any top 100 prospects in the country. But the Mets wound up getting their top 2 prospects in the Astros organization. There's a difference there. And the Mets spun that nicely. But there were a lot of people that said that. And I was like, wait a minute. Yeah, the Astros didn't have not one person in the top 100. So the 2 guys the Mets got, we'll see. I mean, again, you know how I feel about prospects. Only Drew Smith came out of the 5 or so trades they made at the deadline in 2017. One guy made it to the majors, and he's doing okay, so we have to wait and see on these, and but the guy they got for Robertson seems to be a top prospect, Okuna's brother, and it looks like the guys for Scherzer. I might be getting that confused. I'm not sure if he came from the Marlins or he came from the Marlins, right?
No, he came from Texas.
He came from Texas. Okay, so he's the guy they got for Scherzer. So anyway, Ken, here's how I feel, and I want to get your take on the Mets and then the Yankees. I'm extremely disappointed. I remember I told you doesn't feel like the 92, 93 team, because these guys are likable. I was really surprised that with 50, almost 60 games left at the time, that we just said that's it. And the team is now playing as you would kind of expect. They scored 3 runs in 3 games against the Royals. No shade on the Royals. They have, if not the worst, the next to last worst, I think, ERA in the big leagues. They got swept.
They
by
got
the
guys
Royals.
with multiple. They got multiple guys with at least 10 losses.
Yes, they got swept, and they only scored 3 runs, and 2 of those came in the 9th inning of Game 3 in a kind of meaningless 2-run homer by Lindor. So they had scored 1 run in the first 2 games, and for 8 innings of the 3rd game, 1 run against the Royals. Now Brandon Nimmo was also got hurt. Starling Marte came back. They showed fight last night against the high-flying Orioles. We'll get to them a little bit. And they had tied it up. It was 2-2. David Robertson Peterson, rather, I'm sorry, is back in the rotation, and he pitched extremely well. And so it was 2-2. And then because they dismantled the bullpen, they even traded a couple of other guys out of that bullpen. The bullpen got spanked by the Orioles, and the Orioles scored 8 runs in 2 innings. After that, in this 6th and 7th inning, they scored 4 runs in each inning. And so this is going to be a long rest of the season. There's a lot of baseball left. And remember, I told you that the stadium is probably going to be empty, half empty. And it would be exciting next week. They get the Cubs and they get the Braves back at Citi Field next week. Anyway, so here's my overall feeling. I think it stunk. I'm not sure if it's the right thing. I think a lot of Met fans jumped to the conclusion it was the right thing to do. I'm not sure of that, because I think we won't know until we see how these prospects pan out in a couple of years, right? Here's what I do know. You can get hitters, right? You go out and trade and sign hitters. I've always said this, pitching is so hard to get. And now you have a depleted starting rotation. You don't really have any top pitching prospects coming up immediately. And you've got a totally depleted bullpen. Now you're getting Edwin Diaz back next year. We hope, pray that he's back to Edwin Diaz of last year. We don't know that. He's coming off a major surgery where he's out for the year. But he's also the closer. You got to get to the closer. And this was one of the cool things about David Robertson, because he was flexible enough to pitch in the 8th inning. There was sometimes Buck used him as early as the 7th inning to go, to get out their best hitters. So you just don't know. So overall, I hate to be on the fence, but I'm incomplete as to whether or not what they did was good, only because we're not going to know, with these prospects for a couple of years. I will say this, trading Verlander, even though he was only here for a half a season, not even, right? Just about a half a season. I would say half a season, was enormously disappointing. That one was like, when Robertson left, I'm like, okay, Ottavino could probably close. Brooks Raley could probably close. But man, Robertson was really good. Okay. Scherzer, I had that feeling he was going to go after he opened his big mouth. He was probably going to go anyway. But when they traded Verlander, after how good he was, because I said we could ride this guy at least to not get swept and be competitive, get to 500 at least for the rest of the year, Once they traded him, I was like, okay, that's it. To me, I'm not saying Canna and Pham was meaningless. It wasn't. Those were 2 very good players, especially Pham this year. But at that point, it really didn't matter. I'm like, now you traded both of your horses, and that's it. So it's disappointing, but it's an incomplete grade for me. The rest of the season is going to be tough unless they wake up, play some inspired ball. And but I don't know where they're going to get the pitching for that, starting as well as, relieving. Because Quintana was good the other night, but that's Quintana. He's good. He's never been a great pitcher, so, and he's their top guy now, Senga, I'm sorry. Senga didn't pitch that well the other night. First time in a while. He's been great this year. The Senga and Quintana, okay, so you got 2. Peterson, we just don't know. Hopefully he'll be good. And the rest, I have no idea who's who's going to be the other starters. They'll probably bring back up Tyler McGill, and he's been very, very inconsistent. So I want to give it an incomplete, but I would say this is got to be in my top 5 as a Met fan, top 5 disappointment and disappointing years with the expectations. Probably 2017 ranks up there as well. Probably, of course, 92 and 93. I would say 2001 even, and then 2002. So there's been some disappointing seasons, but this one ranks right up there in my top 5. That's my take on the Mets. I'll keep quiet. What was your take on the Mets? And then go ahead and shift to the Yankees.
Well, I think I have a kind of a different take here. First, I will commend Steve Cohen for his candid honesty. Because, Scherzer is like, oh, I'm hearing that, you guys aren't looking to try to retool for next year. This is a 3-year plan. And he told him yes. Which, a lot of owners, I don't think would have necessarily done that.
Agree.
So, go Steve Cohen for being honest. I think also the Mets were looking, they're 7 games out of the second wild card. You have to jump over so many different teams. I think they were like, hey, let's just sell. Let's get what we can get. And I think it was the right move because you could try to run it back next year, but you still have the Braves who have guys left and right that'll be there. Yeah. The Phillies, if they can figure out what's wrong with Trey Turner, I know we'll get to him later on. The Phillies are the defending National League champions too, so there's still danger there. The Marlins continue to get better. And then obviously you got the Nationals who are still the Nationals. So I think looking at it and saying, man, the way that we have this roster constructed, we got to tweak some things. Committed, what was it, over $80 million to your 2 aces. I know they're still paying some of that, but being able to ship most of that off. Thank you for bringing it to the American League. Really appreciate that as a Yankee fan. But I think it's the right move. I think you kind of have to say, I think Steve Cohen, Billy Epler looked themselves in the mirror and were like, this team isn't working. Let's figure out how to look a little bit longer term. Because remember also, there was a point where Carlos Correa was almost on this team too.
Yeah.
And it just would have been, and I know I've heard some Met fans say this is the most disappointing team in all of New York sports in the last century or whatever. I think that's a little dramatic.
Yeah.
I know the Mets had high expectations. They won 101 games last year, but it's not that level. I know also they spent a lot of money, highest payroll ever. But I want to read you this list off here because I think it makes sense if you get both of these guys off. Here's what you got going for you as far as free agents go this upcoming offseason. Obviously, the big one is going to be Shohei Ohtani. And I don't know with that. I can't say, oh, yeah, the Mets are definitely – because it sounds like they're not even going to be big free agent players this year. I won't buy that until I see it. I think everyone and anyone that can potentially pay Ohtani is going to try.
Mm-hmm.
But you have him. Clayton Kershaw, who I don't think is probably going anywhere. But listen to this list of guys after that. You have Aaron Nola, who's really good. Blake Snell, Julio Urias, Eduardo Rodriguez, who has an opt-out. Lucas Giolito, Sonny Gray. I would not go for Sonny Gray. Marcus Stroman also, no. Jordan Montgomery, though, he would be a good fit. Yeah. Jack Flaherty, Lance Lynn, Kenta Maeda, Charlie Morton has an option. Alex Cobb has an option. Kyle Hendrick has an option. Seth Lugo has an option. Rich Hill, who's 1,000 years old. Corey Kluber has an option. Hyun-Jin Ryu. Severino, I mean, we'll talk about him in a second. Zach Greinke, he wouldn't fit here either. He's also 1-11. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah, he pitched great the other night, though.
Yeah, a lot of his record is the team's. Yes. The team is awful. Oh, I do have this actually. 3 guys, by the way, for the Royals have pitched or has started at least 20 games. Jordan Lyles, Brady Singer, and Zach Greinke. Here's their record in ERA. Brady Singer 7-8, 5.10. Zach Greinke 1-11, 5.32, and Jordan Lyles 3-12, 6.24. Not exactly your 1-2-3 punch there.
Yeah. Wow.
All right. A few more names here. Herman Marquez, who I think would be an interesting fit.
Yeah.
Andrew Heaney, who's been pretty good. Sean Manaea has an opt-out. Frankie Montas, who's been excellent for the Yankees. Jake Odorizzi, Ross Stripling, and Alex Wood. That's just the starters. So a lot of starting pitching available, I think, when you look at this upcoming offseason. Few relievers here. Josh Hader, who will probably get a big bag, I would think. Liam Hendricks, who has already undergone Tommy John surgery, so he's going to be out. Aroldis Chapman, who's kind of revived his career a little bit. Craig Kimbrell, obviously David Robertson. Jordan Hicks, Jose Alvarado. Ottavino has a player option. Blake Trinan, Andrew Chafin, Mark Melanson, Matt Moore, Michael Fulmer, Luis Garcia, Yimi Garcia, Chad Green. Chad Green is really good. Hector Neris, Matt Barnes, not the basketball player, Anthony Bass, Dylan Florio, Daniel Hudson, Jose Leclerc, Alex Reyes, Ryan Stanek, Hunter Strickland, and Kirby Yates. So, like, also a really decent crop of relievers, too. Yeah. Like, not like top tier, but also you're hoping that you can get great stuff out of Edwin Diaz when he comes back. So, and he should have a full offseason if I remember right.
Yeah.
So, like, I think if you're the Mets, you look, okay, so obviously, like, having like the 35 to 40-year-old pitchers didn't really work that much. If we can sign, say, a Blake Snell for a longer contract or an Urias for a longer contract, I think that would work.
Yeah.
And like you look at that, you have like, let's say, I'm just saying those two because those two are probably gonna be the guys that get the most.
Yeah.
We used to go those two, Senga, Quintana, and then whoever else you want in that fifth spot. Add in Jordan Montgomery. He pitched well in New York. He'd be fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I think that they can make it work. Like you said, though, the prospects, it's all a gamble. It's like having a lottery ticket. Like I don't remember who they traded for him, but the Yankees had acquired a couple prospects from the Marlins. Those prospects turned into Domingo Germán and Michael King, which one has worked out kind of well. One pitched a perfect game. So, which I'll get, there's a lot more there in a sec, but like you can't, I think a lot of times when teams are trying to sell, oh, well, this guy's a top prospect. How many top prospects always work out? Like, I saw this stat on the Yankees. The top 3 hitting prospects over Brian Cashman's tenure as GM, according to Baseball Reference WAR, the top 3 WAR producing players that actually like played for the Yankees: Brett Gardner number 1, Aaron Judge number 2, and Anthony Volpe number 3.
Wow.
So like,
and
I remember all of these guys. It's like, oh, this guy's going to be the next so-and-so. This guy's going to be awesome. And then it just never works out.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't until Ken Griffey Jr., which, like, when you think about the long history of the MLB draft, Ken Griffey Jr. was the first ever number 1 overall pick inducted into the Hall of Fame.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
So, like, it's really, really hard to say this guy is definitely going to hit. But I think if you clear payroll and you get guys that you know you can have longer term, I think it could work out.
Okay.
So we'll see.
Good counter argument. Can I say this real quick with Cohen? I should have mentioned this. I do admire his honesty, and I did admire that he flew to Kansas City and he talked to the team. You know, he didn't have to do that. Most owners probably wouldn't, and so I thought that was good as well. So you made a good argument. You made me think about the other side there.
Well, and as far as the Yankees go, there's a lot I could say here, and we could be here for hours, but I'm going to just start here with this. I would have really understood selling, trading away Gleyber Torres, trading away a Wandy Peralta or IKF, who has, like, I talked a couple weeks ago about how Garrett Cole was like the only bright spot. IKF has been really good the last couple of months here. Mm-hmm. Like, I forgot the exact breakdown, but he's batting over 300 over the last few months. He's also played 7 different positions.
Wow.
The only ones he hasn't played is first base and catcher. And he came up as a catcher, so I want him to do both. And obviously Rizzo's hurt. So I would love for him to be like he could be that guy that's played every single position this year. But that's neither here nor there. But I think I would have been okay with selling. Obviously, it would have been nice to buy, but it seemed like a lot of like the bigger names kept coming off the market. Obviously, number one would have been Ohtani, and nothing really happened there. Juan Soto, the Padres were like, hey, well, even though we're not that good, we'll still try to buy and add a few pieces. And obviously the big one that the Yankees had their minds on and their hearts set on was Bellinger, and then the Cubs won 8 straight. So, like, I understand that a lot of the bigger names weren't out there, especially like the pending free agent bigger names. Plus, you don't want to give up a lot of your young pieces, especially when you look at this team has a lot of age around it. Whether you're talking Stanton is looking older than he actually is. DJ LeMahieu has looked really old. And like a lot of the court is aging. So I understand that. What I don't understand is I'm gonna keep harping on this. You go back to when the Yankees signed Carlos Rodon. Like, stuff was exciting. And Hal Steinbrenner said, we're not done. This is what he meant by we're not done, because these are the guys that they signed after Carlos Rodon. They signed, or they acquired, so both signs and trades. Willie Calhoun, Billy McKinney, Cole Calhoun, who hasn't played at the major league level yet, Nick Ramirez, Franchi Cordero, Greg Allen, Spencer Howard, and Kenyon Militant. That's your Death Star lineup right there. And I think that's my biggest issue is like buying or selling. I was kind of on the fence because of where they were at the standings. You're in last place. You got a lot of teams that you have to leapfrog, and also you don't have as many divisional games. So like, I understand both ways, but I feel like doing nothing and just saying we hope that things get better was kind of the biggest mistake here. Because like, I mean, they threw out Severino again. Like, they keep saying like we have this sense of urgency, but you don't see it in what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like, you had a chance to win a series against the Baltimore Orioles, and you sat Aaron Judge in the last game. This is a huge series against the Houston Astros, and Aaron Judge sat again. Now, I know he's coming back from injury, but the guy is playing DH more than he's playing right field anyway. And you're trying to pull him anytime he's playing in the outfield. So, like, don't tell me there's urgency, and then you're not playing your best players out there. Severino has been absolutely awful the last, 2 months here.
Yeah.
And yet he's still starting every 5 days. Like, at some point you got to pull him and send him to the bullpen. But it just doesn't seem like they're willing to do that. Aaron Boone saying after the team strikes out 18 times, tying a franchise record, he goes out and says, well, aside from the strikeouts, I think that we had really good at-bats. Well, what other at-bats were there?
I didn't see the clip on that. I read it. Was he joking or was he serious?
No. Because he does the weekly spot with John Boy Media.
Right.
There he said, oh yeah, I still stand by that. Like, he's 100% serious about it. And you know how much that infuriates Yankee fans to be like, oh, well, we're still looking pretty good. At some point there has to be that sense of urgency. And the only time I've seen that with Boone is when he slammed the table last August, when they were dreadful, and then after that the team turned it around. I just don't I don't understand that. And you look at this team, if I'm assuming they'll probably finish over 500, there's probably some kind of winning streak in there somewhere. When Judge is in the lineup, the Yankees have usually around a 600 winning percentage. So there's bound to be that winning streak in them.
Yeah.
But it still kind of seems like you're saying, well, we believe in these guys, and instead of kind of just shaking up the offense, we're going to just keep running it. And I think they need to shake something up.
Yeah.
I don't know if I mentioned this last week or not. In left field, they've started 21 players over the last 3 years.
Oh my gosh. That's got to be one of the highest in the major leagues.
Yeah, and every single offseason, last two offseasons, Brian Cashman has said, oh yeah, we're going to try to shore up left field. And they've done nothing with it.
Yeah.
Because the rotation is decent. Cole is obviously, Cole might win a Cy Young this year. He's been really good.
Yeah.
Clark Schmidt has been also really good. Rodon still seems like he's in spring training mode. Guy's got a 6 ERA, and he's what we got going Sunday. So
Yeah.
yay. Cortez is starting tonight or today with their afternoon game, but and he's coming back from 2 months of being hurt, so you don't know what you're going to get from him yet. And he's going against one of the teams that were kind of fighting for one of the last wild card spots.
Yeah.
But like the rotation, I'm not that worried about. Even if Rodon has a lost year, I think if he could stay healthy and start next year, I think he'll be fine. And like some of the other guys, I think like who they have slotted, it should be fine. But like this lineup still doesn't look that great.
No.
Gleyber Torres has been one of the better hitters, and like I keep hearing it, and I have to look up his numbers a little bit more, but he's been like marginally good according to like baseball average standards. But like Willie Calhoun was designated for assignment last week.
Right.
He was the Yankees' number 3 hitter for most of the time he was here, and nobody picked him up.
Yeah. Now, did he refuse to go to the minors? Did I see that somewhere?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he elected free agency instead of going for outright assignment.
I'm reading between the lines of what you're saying. You're not confident that, am I right or wrong? It doesn't sound like you're confident that the Yankees are going to make the playoffs.
As of right now, no. I think there's a chance that they could sneak in because, I mean, they are only 3.5 games back. They still have games against the Red Sox. They still have games against the Blue Jays. So, like there's a chance. I'm just not fully sold on it.
Yeah.
Like, even if they make the playoffs, I know, like, stuff can happen. But, like, I don't know who would you go in a wild card series here? Because do you go Cole game 1? And then I have no idea who you trust. Like, I would probably say Cole game 3.
Right.
Clark Schmidt game 2. And then, I don't know.
Yeah.
Nestor Cortez game 1.
Well,
like, it just kind of seems a little.
If he's healthy, I would trust him in Cortez in game 1. So I feel differently also now about the Yankees a little bit in this way, right? There were times like 2017, 2018, where when they were losing in the postseason, I just felt like, okay, they all went into a slump, or, okay, let me just say this. Right now, I feel like the Orioles, Tampa, and Texas, and the Astros are just better than the Yankees. I think the Yankees and the Blue Jays are around on the same level. And the Red Sox are a little bit below, even though they're ahead of the Yankees right now, I think. And so I was really, as stunned as I was with Verlander, I was kind of, even though you had kind of said it, you said, well, I think the Yankees are just going to either do 1 or 2 minor moves or nothing. And you were right. I was stunned that they didn't get into the mix because there were some players available. How did the Marlins come up with these couple of bats? Jake Berger and Josh Bell. I mean, I know Bell hasn't had a good first part of the year, but he was hitting lately, and we know his track record. And Berger has like 25 home runs. How is it that, the Marlins could pry those guys away from the White Sox and the Guardians, and the Yankees didn't, make a move for that with all the prospects that they have? And so it's going to be tough, I think, for the Yankees. And I agree with you. I think they could still get in. I do think there's a streak in them, but I think they're getting left behind here, man, in the long term.
Yeah, because, like, I look at next year, basically what you're hoping for next year is, one, that Aaron Judge stays healthy. And, like, most of his injuries are, like, kind of weird freak injuries, but still, like, hit by pitch, break your wrist, you can't really help that. Dive and you puncture your lung, like, you can't help some of that, but it could still happen. So you're like crossing your fingers that Judge is healthy. You cross your fingers that Stanton is healthy, and you're crossing your fingers that Rizzo stays healthy. That's the other thing. Like, Anthony Rizzo got hurt like late May, had like that weird collision with Tatis, and they insisted that he was fine. He was going to play the next day, and then didn't play the next series. And then, like, it's not until a couple days ago that they say, oh, wait, yeah, he has concussion symptoms, and he's going to be out for, they say, several weeks. Just so I had texted this to you, just so we, they said, so since that collision, 46 games, 192 plate appearances, batted 172, on base at 271, slugging 225, 1 home run, 9 RBIs, 44 strikeouts, and 7 extra base hits.
Yeah.
Like that's like an extra base hit a week, essentially.
I got to ask you this. I don't think it's a Yankee thing. I think it's more Major League Baseball, and they're not used to the concussion stuff. Like the NFL has gotten so much better, right, at that. But, you know, I'm not giving them too much credit because they were kind of forced to. But I think baseball is going to have to be forced to. Do you remember this name? Because this came to me when you were talking, when you sent me that yesterday or the day before. Do you remember the name Ryan Church?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he was a really good player with the Nationals. The Mets got him when they traded Last Things Millage. Him and Brian Schneider. Brian Schneider was a pretty good catcher, if I remember right. But Church was the centerpiece of that deal. The Mets thought he was going to be a good left or right fielder. I forgot where he played. I know he was an outfielder and a first baseman for a while because he was a good young player. Then he got a concussion, and I want to say he was sliding to second base and a knee hit him in the head. Right? It was something like that. I don't think he got hit by a pitch. Either way, the Mets let him fly from Colorado that same night, in the thin air back to New York. And the Mets got killed for that because his concussion symptoms on the flight coming back got worse, which it's now known you shouldn't be flying with if you have any sort of symptoms, but baseball just didn't know. Now, that's got to be a good 10, 15 years ago, right? Baseball still hasn't gotten better at the concussion stuff. They've gotten a little cautious with some players. But how do you let Anthony Rizzo go that many months in May? They played the Padres in May, right?
Yeah.
So June, July,
May.
all this time. So 2 months. And they didn't recognize that. I'm sure he had to say something. I know he probably wanted to stay in the lineup. He's just that type of player. But I mean, come on. That is, but it's not a Yankee thing. I think that's more of a baseball problem, because it wasn't hit by a pitch, you know?
Yeah. Well, and this to me wasn't a baseball thing. This is 100% a Yankee thing.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The whole drama of, not the Rizzo thing, but the whole drama surrounding Domingo Germán. Gotcha. I don't know how much of that you saw.
Yes, I did.
Because I think with Rizzo, I guess I can understand that. But the Yankees are also still very weird with injuries. It was like, Judge is hurt. We're not sure he's coming back. Oh, he's coming back in like 3 days. Like that's kind of one of their MOs.
Yeah.
But with Domingo Germán, the guy is like a late scratch on Monday, because of an armpit injury, which I've never heard of anyone having an armpit injury.
Armpit injury, okay.
So then supposedly the doctor, which he was complaining about this Friday, the doctor can't see him until Monday at 5, which I don't know what the deal is with that. So then the doctor looks at him, he's cleared, and then comes in and pitches 5 innings of shutout relief. But then it's like a couple days later that the Yankees put him on the restricted list to go get alcohol rehab. Yeah. Which then yesterday it comes out that apparently he was like super drunk in the clubhouse, yelling at Aaron Boone, throwing couches and stuff like that, which is very
wow.
Yeah. Wow. And it just became like a very like serious situation. So like, was he hurt or was he drunk? Like, I don't get why you can't just be honest the first time.
Yeah.
And like, and I don't know. And that might still be how it went. But at the same time, it just kind of feels like they're very like I had said, I commend Steve Cohen for being honest. I feel like sometimes the Yankees aren't honest with their fans. Like, why are you telling us we're not done signing guys, and then the best player you sign is Willie Calhoun. Like, why is it that like this guy is fine, healthy, and then all of a sudden he's hurt? Because even with Judge,
Yeah.
they're like, oh, minor toe injury, he should be fine and back in a week. And the guy misses almost 2 months and has a torn ligament in his toe. Like, where's the miscommunication there?
Yeah, they run things differently, the Yankees, and I'm not sure why that's changed in terms of they used to go crazy and overspend, right? They apparently they don't do that anymore, and I think that's actually a good thing. I think they're more prudent. But when there's clear needs that I think us fans can see, and even Cashman talks about them, it's amazing to me that they don't go out and find something, because that used to be the Yankee way. How long has Brian Cashman been the GM there now?
I believe 25 years.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that he should be replaced or anything like that, but
He should be.
wow, okay. Well, you said you're the fan, and you follow it a lot closer than I follow it. What about Aaron Boone?
I kind of think Aaron Boone needs to go too. I think their culture is like, which like I totally get, like, we're sports on the positive tip. I totally get super positivity. But at some point, like, I feel like there's not enough accountability and urgency.
Yeah.
Because like a lot of times when Aaron Boone is interviewing, he's like, well, these guys look like they're getting a couple good at bats in. Like, what was the deal with Anthony Volpe? Like, you still, and he's still kind of not doing that great. And yet he's still the third best position player that the Yankees have developed over the last 25 years. But like, it kind of seems like anytime these guys are like not doing that well, Boone is just like, we're gonna right the ship, and then just kind of hopes for the best.
Yeah. I guess I'm a little speechless, because I haven't heard you talk this strongly in a long time, well, I don't think forever about the Yankees, because you're like me, such a loyal fan. I think, Ken, it's more magnified because I think that the Yankees have kind of done business a little bit like this for a while now. They keep things in house, which, as a fan, we want to know, right? We want to know, but I think there's nothing wrong with, we talked about the Cardinal way, right? And how the GM just kind of, with the whole Wilson Contreras stuff earlier in the year. And then when was the last time a Cardinal GM would come out at the deadline and say, yeah, we're open for business. Everybody can go, so that was a little bit different. Whereas at the Yankees, I think they've kind of done business a little bit like this for a while. But I think where it gets magnified is you're on national television and you give up how many? 6 runs in the first inning and 18 strikeouts. And all of a sudden, people are blinking because they haven't seen the Orioles. We talked about that. And now you look at the Orioles and you start to compare them to the Yankees. Oh my gosh, the Orioles are just better. And you look at Tampa Bay and you start to compare them to the Yankees. So this, I think, got overshadowed when the Yankees was still better than most of the American League teams, in spite of, some playoff failures, a lot of playoff failures in the last several years, but they've been getting to the playoffs and they've been having these really, really good regular seasons. It's now some of the stuff you're talking about, I think, becomes a lot more magnified. Now right now, it would be fair to say, right, the Yankees are a mediocre team. They're not a bad team. The Mets are a bad team right now, right? The Mets are 9 games under 500. That's a bad team. You are what your record says you are, says Bill Parcells, right? And the Yankees are a few games over 500, so they're not a terrible team. But in the mix, there's teams that have passed them by, and now all these things, not talking about injuries, and, they become more magnified. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I totally agree. I feel like there's a lot of these teams have kind of passed them because, like, 17, 18, 19 Yankees, when you have like still a pretty young Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton more in his prime, a young Gleyber Torres, like a lot of these young guys who kind of were supposed to kind of take the next level. Gary Sanchez also in there too. But like now you look and a lot of those guys look immediately old or they're gone.
Yeah.
And then And then Baltimore, they have guys like Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rushman that are killing it.
Yeah.
Tampa Bay seems to find guys out of the middle of nowhere and revive their careers.
And that's the last point I want to make on that part. And then we could talk a little bit about Trey Turner and the rest of the deadline. How long has Tampa done business like they've been doing? They've been doing it like this for a while now. You know, if I remember right, weren't they the first team that had the opener and, you know, emphasize more on the bullpen than starting pitchers? They don't keep guys for too long. They usually will trade them away, get something else for them. They rely on their farm system. You know, now they happen to have two big stars, one that they've got locked up, one they'll probably lock up, but they overall still don't spend much money because they still don't, as good as they are, they still don't sell that stadium out. They still need a new stadium, but yet every year, year in and year out, they find themselves in the postseason or in the World Series. And they've done business like this for a while. Now, what'll happen is if they have a season where they'll be 10 games under 500, then people will criticize and say, oh, you know, now look at that. See, it caught up with them, you know, oh, the Tampa way, you know. And I think that's what's happened a little bit with the Yankees. The Yankees have kind of done business like this now for a little while. Think about this. They really, if you look at the last 4 or 5 off seasons, they haven't gone out and gotten the big star. Garrett Cole was kind of the last big one. And maybe part of that is they're a little jaded with Stanton. I know that was a trade, but then they signed him, you know. And so I don't know. I'm shocked though that you're not pessimistic. I'm not saying that at all, but you've been brutally honest about where this team is at.
Yeah, it's hard because like Stanton has started to look better, and I think he's kind of fully getting healthy.
Yeah.
With Rizzo on the injured list, so the lineup looks a little bit different. But still, like, I don't know. Like they just released the lineup. Let's see if I can pull it up here.
Yeah. Bring up Luke.
First of all,
Luke Voigt. Go ahead and bring him back.
Well, there's been now a little bit more noise with that too, which okay, I'm kind of okay with that.
I always liked him. It's been odd how his career has gone a little sideways, but I always liked him.
Yeah, and me too. Like I think he's really good. I think like he kind of fits he kind of makes the Yankees relax a little bit.
Yeah.
But now that Rizzo could be out for like a month, I mean, why not throw out Luke Voigt there?
Of course. Yeah.
So the Yankees lineup today, you got Jake Bauers leading off, Judge and right, Torres at second, Stanton DH, LeMahieu at third, Kiner Falefa at left, Bader at center, Volpe at short, and Vet behind the plate. Aside from Judge, you got Gleyber Torres batting 263. IKF is batting 253. Everyone else, Bader's 252. But you got like your leadoff batter is hitting 229.
Yes, there's some underachieving happening there too, because overall, when you name those players, it's not a bad lineup. You know, it's not terrible. I mean, there's a lot more lineups in baseball that are bad. But again, when you look at the teams that they're going after, you know, does it compare to having, you know, Franco and a Rosarina, you know, in the lineup, or the guys you mentioned with the Orioles, or the guys at Texas that are, you know, there's about 4 or 5 guys that had over 20 home runs there, you know, that's where are the Astros who just continue to plug away. I know you hate them, but it's real. It's hard for the Yankees right now, but I just don't think it's going to be hard for them to get into the postseason, but it's certainly they're close. They're not, you know, they're not 10 games out, you know?
Yeah. Well, 2 quick things. Also Judge, by the way, still leads the team in home runs, even though he missed like 2 months.
That's amazing.
Which that tells a lot about Judge and the rest of his team.
Yeah.
Also, I completely forgot about this. You know, starting for the Astros, right?
Verlander.
Yeah. So thank you for that.
Yeah, he didn't have to leave New York, I think he didn't get on a plane. I think he just met them here, if I'm not mistaken. All right, so let me ask you this. Who improved themselves the most at the trading deadline?
I'm going Texas.
Okay. Yeah.
You got Max Scherzer. You already have like a pretty good rotation, but you added Max Scherzer and Jordan Montgomery
Yeah.
to an already pretty strong team.
Yeah.
And like you said, their offense is right now firing on all cylinders. Like they got Marcus Simeon's had a bounce back year. Corey Seager, I know he just came back from injury, but like Corey Seager's still really good. They've got like major league players out there that are doing what they need to do. And also like not a huge move, but an underrated move is they got Aroldis Chapman.
Yeah.
And that was a month or so ago,
Yeah.
but I think it's them. Because also they look at this opportunity now. You called it from the beginning, Bruce Bochy making a huge difference there.
My goodness. Absolutely.
And they want to make sure that they can keep that gap between them and the Astros as big as possible.
Okay. Yeah. I think you're dead on there. I liked what the Marlins did. Picking up David Robertson, picking up Jake Berger, Josh Bell, and unfortunately, and I've always liked Gene Segura. I always thought he was a very clutch player, no matter where he's been. But I think these last couple of years with the Phillies, he's clutch, but he's not a third baseman. I don't know why the Marlins. Well, I know why, because they had good second baseman there. They shuffle their guys around a lot. They put their second baseman in center field, and so I think also getting him off the team at this point was pretty good. But they picked up a couple of really good veterans. I think Josh Bell will hit. He's been more in the National League than he has been in the American League. And this guy Berger has 25 home runs, 60-something RBIs. I mean, that was a guy I was just wondering why, again, I don't want to go back to the Yankees, but if the Marlins can pry him loose, and the Marlins have some good prospects that they were able to trade to the White Sox, I think, Sandy Alcantara is having a bit of an off year, especially for him. If he picks it up in these last 2 months, they're a dangerous team. So I wanted to real quick, they made some good moves. They got obviously Luis Arraez. He's not going to hit 400, unfortunately, but I think he's batting 377 still, which is really great. They made some nice moves, but they have a lot of the same core team. And Skip Schumacher, first year as manager, has really, put a nice spark in them. So they're going for it. Their attendance is up and everything. And it made me question Don Mattingly and how good a manager he actually was. And this is no knock on him, but sometimes, and Buck Showalter falls into the same category, the people who replace some managers at times, they seem to have success almost right away. And so when you think about the Dodgers, they were in the playoffs almost every year with Mattingly, but then, they finally let him go, and Dave Roberts takes over, and they win a championship. They go to the World Series. They get over the hump. Go to the World Series several times with Roberts. And I think Roberts is an overthinker. I'll say that again as the postseason starts. We'll start to see that, but he's a good manager, But then Mattingly goes to the Marlins, hire him right away. And, the Marlins struggle for all the years that he was there. I think they made the playoffs in the but COVID shortened year. But that was their only highlight, really. And now Schumacher comes in, and they're a legit contender this year, Now, you said you were going to say something about Mattingly because it was down to Mattingly and Girardi to replace Joe Torre. And, they chose Girardi, who wasn't as popular a Yankee, not nearly. In fact, there aren't many Yankees in history that are as popular as Don Mattingly, but yet Cashman made what I think at the time was a tough decision to go with Girardi, and it definitely panned out with a championship. But what's your take on Mattingly?
Well, because that when at the end of the year, people were saying, at the end of last year, people were saying that Boone should. I mean, you hear it all the time with Yankee fans that Boone should be fired. But they were saying that they should replace Boone with Don Mattingly since he had just gotten fired from the Marlins.
Right.
But I was gonna say, I don't know if that's gonna be great, because like a guy like Mattingly would have to be successful, because you don't want to like sour that type of relationship with like he's like you said, he's a Yankee darling. Like everybody loves Don Mattingly. People won't love him if this team is a 500 team under his helm, especially if, let's say, they replace him with some rando manager and they go on this crazy run and all. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's a really, really interesting take. I had often wondered that, different sport. I'd often wondered that, and I don't wonder it too much now because it doesn't look like he's a great coach. But I often wondered, was that one of the reasons why the Knicks never gave Patrick Ewing a shot at being the coach? I mean, is there a more icon Nick than Patrick Ewing? But when he got the shot here at Georgetown, he didn't. I don't think he's going to get another shot. I mean, they fell way off of the map. I know it's college and everything, but maybe as an assistant coach, that might be his lane. I don't know. But I think that's hard, right? When you have an icon that becomes the manager and then it gets tough, they get booed and you have to fire them. I think that's a great point. I could have factored in with Cashman's decision back then, right?
Yeah, I think that might have been part of it.
Yeah, I could have factored in. Anybody else that is standing out for you? I mean, well, let me get your take on the Angels, and then I'll ask you about Trey Turner. They've fallen off. I think they've won now. They've lost, I think, 4 in a row or something like that. So they fell off a little bit. It looks like Otani's finger keeps messing up. He had a blister, and then it was numb this past time around. So they might have to shut him down from pitching, for the rest of the year, which would be brutal, for them, because he's just as important, on both sides for them. How about the Angels, and are there any other teams that surprise you in the last week or so?
The Angels, I mean, right now they're game over 500, 5 back of the wild card. I don't know. It'll be an uphill battle, but also and difference between Yankees and the Angels. Angels are looking towards having Mike Trout back.
Right.
And that can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It'll be interesting because also, like, the Seattle Mariners got a little bit better. They made a couple of smaller, low-key moves. They're still in 4th place, and I'm assuming right now you're gonna have 2 wild card spots in the East, 1 in the West. There's no way any team is going out of the Central.
Yeah.
The Yankees, despite their season, would still be in 1st place in the Central.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you're gonna see the team from the Central, but what they'll have to do is they would have to leapfrog 2 teams in order to make it there. I think it's still an uphill battle. It's possible. We might see it. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see kind of how the rest of that season unfolds. Also, I'll just give props to Baltimore. I love that they got Jack Flaherty. I know I had said Shohei Ohtani would be
great
fun,
move.
but I'm
Yeah.
glad that they did that.
That was a great move. And you were reading that they were in for Verlander as well, That was a great move. I agree with you. You mentioned Seattle, though. Were you surprised that they traded their closer, the ex-Met, Paul Sewald?
A little bit.
Yeah. They must have somebody to replace him. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe it's they got maybe a marginally better, because closers you can kind of.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes with closers, if you get a guy that's done pretty well in the 8th inning, you can slot him in the 9th. But also sometimes it just never works out that way.
Yeah. Not on the same level, but I was a little bit surprised the way, was it last year when Milwaukee traded Josh Hader at the deadline? And I was like, what are they doing, man? They're right in the mix, and Devin Williams has been great, to replace him. So they probably have somebody confident enough, because they got a couple of prospects for him. Trey Turner. It has been one of my favorite players, because I think he's always been a legit 5-2 player, and certainly starting out with the Nationals, and then the year and a half or so with the Dodgers, signs a 11-year contract, you told me, with the Phils. And Philadelphia, God bless him, you and I have been in that stadium. Beautiful ballpark, great location, right on and off the highway, great atmosphere. Except those fans, man, can be, oh man, they're even tougher, I think, than the New York fans at times.
They're brutal.
They're brutal. And I'll never forget when the Cardinals, and I got to see the Cardinals there years ago, when Hall of Famer Scott Rowland, and it would have been 3-4 years, and they booed him like crazy, and Scott Rowland was one of those, kind of a little bit of a long list of Philadelphia players that was like, get me out of here. I don't want to play here. Scott Rowland, it was more in the front office than the fans. But if I remember right, I think you and I talked about that but Trey Turner has been booed mercilessly. And that's caused him, I think, to make some really bad plays. I mean, he blew a game for them the other night with an error and then striking out. What's been your take on that? And then supposedly, I think this weekend they're going to cheer him loudly every time he comes up, because he answered honestly when they said, "Does the booing bother you?" He said, "Absolutely, it does." Because here's a guy who probably has never been booed in his life. I mean, they loved him in Washington, and I'm sure they loved him in LA.
Yeah. I don't know. That's one of the things where it's like, because I mean, Washington, LA, they have pretty decent fan bases, but they're never like. When was the last time you heard Clayton Kershaw getting booed, or Mookie Betts, or Freddie Freeman? Like, that never happens.
No.
But I mean, Aaron Judge, who's literally the captain of the Yankees, was booed in the playoffs last year. Like it.
No.
You gotta. I think when you come to free agency and you're going to a place like Philly, or you're going to a place like New York, or sometimes Boston, depending on how they're feeling about their team, like you gotta. That's going to be part of the game. But also, I think it shows the relationship there that, like, okay, we really want to see this guy going. Because I feel like let's say Pete Alonso went like 0 for 50 with like 35 strikeouts.
Don't say it. Come on, man.
But like Met fans started booing him, and he said, "I don't like getting booed." I feel like the Met fans would boo him more. Yankee fans too.
Yeah. Well, Bryce Harper also came to Turner's defense and is like, and now he has the credibility there now, right? And he's like, "Come on, guys, why are we booing this guy?"
Yeah. So, I mean, I get it. It'll be very interesting to kind of see how that continues to pan out in that way.
Yeah.
But
Listen, he'll come back next year, bat 300, hit 25 homers, knocking 100 RBIs. All will be well. But you went down an interesting road. We'll do this have a little fun with this real quick. What are the cities? So the cities, they really don't boo LA, right? They're just too laid back. Angels and can you imagine the LA the Angels in Orange County there booing Mike Trout if he went like 0 for 20 or something like that? Absolutely not, right? Seattle, they're not booing. St. Louis, they never boo their players there.
Yeah.
They're just hardcore, fans that are just totally loyal. Chicago, though, it was Sammy Sosa, his last year or two there, he was getting booed a lot. You mentioned Boston. I remember watching a game of the week, and Collier Yastrzemski, Hall of Famer, coming up, was having a bad year. And I'm like, wow, they were booing him like crazy on national television. Mike Schmidt, I remember getting booed mercilessly in Philadelphia. Cincinnati, I never heard them boo any of their star players.
Yeah.
It's funny how that's a city to city thing, but New York and Philly are probably the two worst.
Yeah. I think of Baltimore when Chris Davis started the year like 0 for 57. I don't think he got booed once.
I don't think he got booed. Yeah. Atlanta, they don't really boo their players either.
No.
They, so. All right, lots of baseball to continue to talk about. Let's hit a real quick football story, and then we'll do some inspiration. I got to tell you, man, I was really surprised at this whole Sean Payton and Nathaniel Hackett. And now that Nathaniel Hackett is here as the offensive coordinator for the Jets, it sort of became a big story here in New York. I don't have the quotes. Essentially, Sean Payton says the job that Nathaniel Hackett did there in Denver was one of the worst coaching jobs ever. Now, Nathaniel Hackett didn't make it out of the first year. He got fired, 13, 14 games in or something like that. So he didn't make it out of the first year. And so it surprised me. Sean Payton, he's got a World Series. He's got a Super Bowl ring. He's been very, very successful. We knew he'd get a job when he wanted one, and I think he chose a really good one. I think the Broncos are going to be very good this year. But should he have done that?
No. I think because what you have essentially done is put a target on your back.
Yep.
Because now, if it's more of a Russell Wilson thing and less of a coaching thing, people look at Sean Payton and be like, well, are you any better than Nathaniel Hackett was?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think he put a lot of unnecessary pressure on himself, but maybe he's doing that to try to take some of the pressure off of Russell Wilson.
Could be. Yeah.
Because obviously, like, if Russell Wilson doesn't perform this year, then we're looking at potentially the worst contract in, I wouldn't say NFL history, but currently in the NFL.
Oh, I agree. I totally agree. And I like Russell Wilson. I was very disappointed because Denver was my pick to go to the Super Bowl last year. So I don't think I'm going to pick them this year, but I think Wilson will have a bounce back year. I think that's a great point you made. But how about then Aaron Rodgers taking up for and using the Will Smith line, right? Take my coach's name out your mouth. Don't be mentioning our coaches in your mouth. But how about this? It's week 5. Jets at Denver. I believe it's at Denver. That should be must-see TV.
Oh yeah, if that's not a 4:00 game, I don't know what
Gotta
the
be.
NFL is doing.
Oh, it has to be. Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of the Jet games are going to be, big games this year. All right, you ready for some inspiration?
Let's do it.
We'll start to talk more football as we go down the road here. I want to talk about Jim Abbott. I'm just going to read this article that I found this week. Jim Abbott was one of the most remarkable stories in baseball history. Because he was born without a right hand, his parents encouraged him to play soccer as a kid, but he loved baseball. And despite his disability, he became a terrific player. As a senior at Central High School in Flint, Michigan, he won 10 games on the mound, played first base in the outfield on days he wasn't pitching. Now, again, he doesn't have a right arm, right? He has just half an arm there. But he batted .427 with 7 home runs, and that led him the opportunity to continue his career at the University of Michigan. There, Abbott received the Golden Spikes Award as the top amateur player in the country in 1987, beating out, you holding on to your chair? Beating out Ken Griffey Jr. and Robin Ventura.
Wow.
After compiling a 26-8 record at Michigan, Abbott was selected in the first round of the draft by the then California Angels. Without any minor league seasoning, he landed in the Angels starting rotation in 1989, and he then enjoyed his finest season as a big leaguer in 1991 when he went 18-11 with a 2.89 ERA and 34 starts for the Angels and finished third in the Cy Young balloting behind Roger Clemens and Minnesota's Scott Erickson. Abbott tossed a no-hitter as a member of the New York Yankees at Yankee Stadium on September 4th, 1993, which is probably why, right? It'll be 30 years ago, why this came in my inbox. Now, remember, he tossed that against the then potent Cleveland then Indians lineup that included Kenny Lofton, Carlos Baerga, Albert Bell, Manny Ramirez, Jim Tomei, and Sandy Alomar Jr. were all in that lineup that day when he threw a no-hitter. Abbott once described his incredible journey by saying, "I truly believe that difficult times and disappointments can push us to find abilities and strengths that we wouldn't know existed without the experience of struggles." That sounds biblical to me, man.
Yeah.
Really finding the joy in your struggles. Jim Abbott doesn't get talked about enough. I just, if you remember watching him, remember he'd have his glove on his right hand and then he'd have to switch it, after he picked, because he had to field his position. He'd have to switch his glove, to his right hand. And if he fielded a ball, he'd have to take it out. It was just amazing how he had that concentration and coordination. With that disability, which obviously he wouldn't look at as a disability, he was a darn good pitcher for several years. Not Hall of Fame caliber. I think he made the All-Star team a couple of times, but he was just so inspirational. And I'm always surprised that he's kind of, gone into the back into the woodwork now. People don't really talk about him, but I think they'll talk about him a little bit more because it's the 30th year of the anniversary of him pitching a no-hitter as a Yankee. So Jim Abbott, that's my inspiration.
All right. I'm switching my inspiration. I know I told you something else, but I'll save that for next week.
Yeah.
Mainly because I just saw this and I think it's kind of surprising. So we talk about how the trade deadline happens. A lot of times when teams sell or, you have the teams that are struggling, they kind of mail it in. Team that hasn't mailed it in, it's a team that had the worst record in baseball for a while. That's the Kansas City Royals, who currently have the longest active winning streak in baseball at 7 games.
Thank you.
Sorry, no shade there. But I think it goes to show you that, like, sometimes, yes, your team may be struggling, but hey, keep playing hard. You never know what'll happen. Fun fact, the Kansas City Royals now have a longer winning streak this year than the Yankees have had. So,
wow. I was thinking that it's 8 years is a long time, man. It was 8 years that the Mets and Royals played in the World Series. And when you look at both of their records, man, and series, and I gotta say, for those 2 night games, I watched some of the day game, and it was nobody in the ballpark. But for those 2 night games, that stadium in Kansas City was relatively full. I would say at least 3/4, full. And it's a great place to watch a game. You and I have to go there, one day. It's a great place. It's an older stadium now, but they've remodeled it a few times. It opened in 1973, so it's one of the older parks in the American League. But it's a great place to watch a game. But I agree. Listen, hats off to their manager. He's got them playing hard. They played hard. They outplayed the Mets. They really did.
Yeah.
They were taking the extra base. They were stealing. They played hard. So I'll go with that. I'll go with that. Royals is your inspiration. All right, man. Lots to talk about next week. Go ahead and take us home, brother.
all right, this is Kenny Squared N.
Kenny.
The Sports on the Positive Tip. We'll see you guys next week.
Absolutely.